January 25th. And I remember that date because I'm also an ordained minister, and 2 weeks and 1 day before I was diagnosed, I preached this sermon about the Hebrew boys who were in the fiery furnace. And it talked about not being afraid to go through a trial. I basically preached what was about to happen to me in 2 weeks. So it was a really good way to actually practice what I preached quite literally. So it was January 25th, a couple of months before my 39th birthday. I was 38 at the time. And it was a month before we were about to close on our dream house. So there was a lot happening at one time, but I remember that day very, very well. It was the day that changed my life. And I walked around in a fog for a good week and a half. But then something came over me, and I just decided this was like any other problem. I'm going to tackle it, and I'm going to beat it. So the day I found out, I was scheduled to have my regular physical. I have one every January just because I'm a control freak and it's easy to do that every January. And so I was with my doctor, and we weren't scheduled to have a women's exam. And he said, oh, I can help you knock out 2 exams in one by just doing your women's exam now. And so I said, okay. And he was examining my breast and said, And I had a very cystic breast. And so I just thought, well, there's always a cyst in that spot. And then my doctor felt it, and it felt a little suspicious to him. And then he tried to aspirate it, and nothing came out. And so even though I didn't find out that day, I really knew that day that it was breast cancer, because when he inserted the needle, no fluid came out. And if it was a cyst, there would have been fluid. And so it took about a couple of days before I actually had a biopsy and had it tested and had it confirmed. And the best thing about that day was really realizing how wonderful having women in medicine is, because my appointment was at 4:30 that day. I will never forget it. And they tried to make me come back for the results. And all the nurses in that department rallied around, and they all agreed to stay past the time that they were supposed to be there, just so that I could finish my exam and have the results that day. And I just felt so very special, because they, being women, knew how horrible it was going to be for me to have to wait longer than that day to find out. And so that began my very long journey with lots of decisions. And the best thing was, one of those nurses gave me what they call the breast book. I think her name is Dr. Susan Love, and that book became my Bible. And because of that book, I was able to realize that my doctor's first recommendation, which was surgery, was not necessarily the best surgery. So my best advice to women is to first find out what you think before talking to doctors. Do lots of research on your own and formulate your own opinion, because you need to know what you think before you start hearing from the experts, because they're experts in the field but not necessarily experts on you. And be very, very confident to ask for the care in which you want. And so I had my husband, who is my hero, and he handled insurance companies that would say no about being treated where I wanted to be treated. And I read an article that said that women who make their own choices about their treatment fare better. And so I decided that I was going to make my own choices about my treatment. And I'm a person of faith. And so hearing that I had breast cancer didn't really resonate with me in terms of faith, God protecting me, and now I have breast cancer. I don't understand. And I also had one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer, triple negative. And the prognosis was not great. But I would not allow anyone to tell me their cancer horror stories. And so that is another piece of advice. Do not allow anyone to speak negatively to you, even the doctors. And so when the nurse tried to tell me what would happen to me when I had to go through chemotherapy, I stopped her very politely and said, "You cannot tell me what's going to happen to me. You can only tell me what has happened to people who have gone through this treatment before. And you have so much power as a medical professional that to speak to someone negatively gives you too much power over their lives because they're too vulnerable." And she took that advice, and she now changes the way in which she speaks to patients, and she says to them, "You may experience, or people who have gone through this treatment have experienced X." So my next piece of advice would be, do not be afraid to speak up for yourself, and do not be afraid to have your doctor respond to you on your terms. When I had to make tough decisions, I made my doctors meet with me outside of their offices in a conference room so that I was fully dressed and I felt equally powered with them. And so cancer has changed my entire life. I was a career woman, still am. I worked every day through the most aggressive chemotherapy for 6 months, but I was determined that this disease would not rob me of my life. And so I just fought like hell, and I was tough as nails, and I knew I was, but I was always really surprised at how tough I was and how much I was able to draw on my faith in God, but also faith in myself. And my mantra was, I will not die, but live. And that guided every decision that I made, and I made some pretty aggressive decisions based on my diagnosis. I was also BRCA1 positive, which means that the cancer would likely come back, and it would come back in the other breast, and or it would come back in ovaries. So at 39 years old, I decided they could have all of my removable parts. So I gave them my breast, I gave them my ovaries, and I said you can take the uterus too. But that decision was really easy when I decided that my goal was to live. And my goal was to be a mother to my children, who were then 8 and 4. And it was remarkable. And so I sit here now, cancer-free. And it's funny what they can do with plastic surgery, so don't be afraid of that. And I've never been happier. I've never been more grounded. And cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me that I hope never happens again. I do not want to go through the experience again, but I do realize that I probably wouldn't be the person that I am today if I had not gone through that. And I'm pretty in love with the person I am today. And so I can embrace the experience with hope, with actual love of having gone through something that was really, really tough, but emerging on the other side of it a better person than I could have ever imagined I would be. I decided that every year to celebrate my rebirthday, so this is my 3rd rebirthday in November 8th to be exact. And that means that's when I had my double mastectomy and all the cancer was gone. And I decided at that time that each year I would put myself in an out-of-the-box experience. I would make myself uncomfortable and push myself to the limits. So last year I went to Ghana for 3.5 weeks to volunteer for women with breast cancer, because BRCA1 they think originated in Ghana with African American women. And so I wanted to go back and give back. This year I didn't want to spend 3.5 weeks, but this is probably as out of my comfort zone as I get walking down a runway. But I made a pledge that I would do that every year, make myself do something out of the box to stretch myself and make myself grow. But that's why I'm doing the fashion show. But the reason why I do cancer advocacy work and healthcare disparity work is because I feel so guilty about the high level quality of healthcare that I got, knowing that the majority of women don't have access to such great care. And so telling women about it, making sure that I give back to the larger population of women makes me feel like I'm doing something to address those healthcare disparities, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something to let them know that they are not powerless in this situation. And I think most people don't have the support network that I had, for which I'm very grateful. And so I feel committed to being somebody else's support network.